and welcome to Capital Games. I am the Wiz.
And I'm Zero.
Zero, we are closing out our year in review of 2022. Thank God, because there's so much to talk about. But it wouldn't be a year in review about 2022 if we didn't talk about the biggest story that happened all year in gaming. And that is the Microsoft buyout of Activision Blizzard. Why don't we talk about our feelings and thoughts about what both companies were like before the announcement was made. Let's start with Activision Blizzard. Zero, what do you remember before the buyout of Activision Blizzard? When it comes to the reputation, the business side, everything when it came to Activision Blizzard, before Microsoft went to purchase them.
Before the purchase, World of Warcraft was losing money hand over fist, with Final Fantasy XIV eating its breakfast. Mismanagement of a lot of the legacy Blizzard brands, like you had Warcraft 3 Reforged just being a complete trash fire with how they mishandled it, and even in some cases misadvertised it too, because of course they had teased at one BlizzCon with, hey, it's the same Warcraft 3 that you love, but with more up-res graphics and artwork, and it's going to be beautiful. And then when it came out, it was barely a retouching on the entire thing. And then also when that got released, if you had a copy of Warcraft 3 redeemed to your Blizzard account, then it would be soft upgraded to the base code of Warcraft 3 Reforged, which had its own problems with multiplayer. So that in itself was a mess. The Overwatch Pro scene was also stagnating, with some people speculating that maybe Blizzard was artificially pumping money into the competitive Overwatch scene. And then, of course, on the Activision side of the house, they were just kind of a Call of Duty factory for the most part, just pumping out Call of Duty after Call of Duty, with their big phenomenon being Warzone, trying to capitalize on the whole Battle Royale thing. There were some smaller projects with Activision, with the Activision side of the house, like the Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2 remaster, but then you also had stuff like the Crash Bandicoot remasters and Crash 4 also being released, with those being okay. They weren't extremely successful, but they were, at least from what I remember, they were successful enough. But that's really most of what I remember right before this whole purchasing deal for Microsoft came up.
Yeah, and a lot of the old brands that Activision had, let's talk about Guitar Hero, let's talk about Tony Hawk, Skylanders, Spyro. They were mothballed as soon as they started losing money, or they weren't making the sales projections that Activision was expecting it to do. Skylanders is a big example of that. Funny enough, I used to be a big Skylanders fan. I used to love Skylanders. I still don't understand why to a certain extent, but I did. I actually really liked collecting the toys and playing the games. They were a lot of fun to me. But eventually, when the last one came out, it didn't sell as well as the previous ones, so they literally shit-canned the entire series. They just stopped making them. Same with Guitar Hero, same with a bunch of Activision brands that they've had. And then let's not even getting into, before we get into other things though, Activision still was making profits. They were making a lot of money, and that was mainly due to Call of Duty, essentially. They would have a Call of Duty every year, and even though the quality wasn't as consistent as maybe some would be accustomed to, I'm not going to sit and say that some of them were bad, but I think the quality dipped to a certain extent. They still sold a lot of money. So I think that's why you say that they became a Call of Duty factory, essentially. So when it came to sales and the money they were making, they were still making tons of money, but their portfolio and brand in gamers' eyes have definitely become damaged. It also got a rather sizable hit of reputational damage when it came to numerous lawsuits about labor practices, about sexual harassment, about a bunch of ugly things that were starting to be talked about when it came to studio heads, studio directors, Bobby Kotick himself. A lot of things started coming out that was hurting the reputation of Activision Blizzard, specifically the Blizzard side, to a certain extent. I didn't hear much from the Call of Duty devs when all those things were swirling, but we definitely heard a lot of people from who will be the heads of Diablo, Overwatch, WoW. Those developers and those projects specifically started losing a lot of people, and then started losing more people when all the allegations started coming out about sexual harassment, drinking some woman's breast milk, the Cosby Room, just a ton of reputational damage that put them in a bad light, but also did not hurt their sales at all. So I guess the best way to look at Activision before this happening was reputationally, they were in tatters. But when it came to the amount of money they were making, they were still doing really well in that aspect.
Most of my memories were more on just sort of like the reputational side of things, with maybe a light touching on the sales numbers, but I think you pretty much covered the more, I guess you could say, labor and reputation side of things before the purchase. So yeah, I think we pretty much have covered the gamut.
So let's get into what Microsoft was like before this buyout. They just, I think a year previous, bought ZeniMax Media and Bethesda for about $7 billion, or was it $8 billion? It was $7 billion. Okay, so they now own games like The Elder Scrolls, Elder Scrolls, Fallout, Doom, Wolfenstein. They own all those properties now. So they were riding high on that purchase. There were two big problems, though. The Xbox One in the previous generation tanked horribly and suffered a huge blow before even the system came out. And everyone, including us when we were still doing podcasts back then, knew at that moment that, they were not going to recover from this, and they didn't. There's also the fact that with Microsoft, the games did not pan out as well as they would hope, or sell as well as they hoped. There were games like Gears of War and Halo had games that came out, but they didn't sell as well or do as well as they would hope. And then they also had bombs like Recore that did not do very well, and also a game like Scalebound that never came out. It got canceled. So they had numerous problems on their first party end that was causing them a lot of issues. And then once you get into the recent past, they had also games from the Forza developers. They had Fable. They've had Perfect Dark that were all marred in issues from moment one when it came to the development of games. This past year, 2022, they barely had games come out throughout the entire year in their first party. Same thing with 2021. 2020 had Halo Infinite, and that's been it, really. So Microsoft has a huge problem when it comes to their first party titles. I forgot Psychonauts 2, but that has been the big thing that with Microsoft as well.
There's just been a lot of management for a lot of the Microsoft branded games and things like that. I think the biggest one over the last year has really been Halo Infinite.
Mm-hmm.
That one had such a hype machine behind it. It was just this constant bombardment of, it's going to be the best first-person shooter ever. It's going to be so big. We've got huge plans. It's going to be the best multiplayer game ever. Just, they had built it up so hard as being one of the games that is just really, really, really gonna shake things up in the multiplayer space. And then, of course, when it landed back in November of 2021, it landed to a bit of a thud.
Yeah.
It wasn't a splash or anything. And then I think what further didn't help the situation was that on the multiplayer side, they had boasted that the game was going to have just multiple seasons. You would be able to constantly just rip through these season passes to get cool bling gear to, just make your Spartan look super cool and everything. And they were stuck on, I believe, either the first or second season pass for like almost a year. And it was just plain bad. So there was that. And then, of course, you touched on the whole Perfect Dark project, which had the Coalition was working on it with Rare, and then I believe now Crystal Dynamics is now involved in trying to help the project as well too. And that apparently has been a huge mess. But yeah, just that seems to be the big theme with a lot of the Microsoft branded projects. Just a lot of mismanagement, a lot of just messy conceptual stuff. And it almost seemed like the big motivation for this deal to pursue Activision Blizzard was maybe to sort of bolster their brands, to maybe just go, hey, here's some other projects that are actually in great shape, and they are coming to Xbox, and they will surprise you.
Yeah. And Fable, another one I mentioned, it was just revealed, or not revealed, but I think rumors are going around that people are actually thinking it's credible that they had a build with their Forza Tech engine, and it's now been completely scrapped. They're starting over with Unreal Engine. So that's another beleaguered game that is having issues as well. So yeah, Microsoft has had a ton of issues in the past few years just getting games out the door, which is hurting their reputation for their console as a system that, right or wrong, doesn't have any good first-party games. And this will eventually lead to where we're heading now. In January of 2022, it was announced that Microsoft was buying Activision Blizzard for $69 billion. Nice. And the feeling, I want to get your thoughts on this. What were your thoughts when this was announced? When it was announced that Microsoft was buying Activision Blizzard?
Thoughts were, one, okay, looks like Microsoft is trying in some sort of desperation to get some sort of branding that is under their house, that they can say, hey, these projects are in great shape. We have some killer games coming out for the Xbox platform. Oh, P.S. They'll be available with Xbox Play Anywhere with cross-save and cross-play. So these are going to be great additions to the Microsoft side of the house. And then the second thought I had was maybe the board of Activision Blizzard was just trying to find a way to have Bobby Kotick gracefully exit the company, especially with all the controversy that has just come up and everything. Right. From labor weirdness to just the sexual harassment stuff that was going on. And then I think one of the other things that sort of made things even further awkward with Bobby Kotick was apparently his name was in Jeffrey Epstein's Black Book, which wasn't a good look.
That's been there for years now. And
yeah.
So, yeah, that is true. I mean, in Microsoft's case, this was another means to bolster their first-party lineup, which, to be fair, I mean, even before the Xbox One, has not been very strong. They bought a few studios, but Rare was the big acquisition, and now Rare isn't what it used to be. I mean, I know Sea of Thieves is popular in a weird niche way, but even then, it's not what people remember fondly about Rare. There's some issues with that as well. Like, it seems like they've really squandered the sales that they've made. And to others, what my thought process was when the announcement that they were buying it was essentially that they desperately need help with the type of places that they have. Because there's not only... Here's the thing, okay? Activision really only has, 3, 4, 5 studios that makes games? And they have 15, 20 support studios. if I might be wrong, I might be embellishing a little bit, but they definitely have a lot of support studios. My thought process on this was basically, well, first they're buying it for King is the first thing I thought of, but secondly, they have all these support studios that at a moment's notice can say, hey, help on the Fable franchise if you could, please. Hey, Call of Duty guys, Beanox, you guys, Raven, can you help us on Perfect Dark? You know, I think that was a lot of what they were going for too on this. Like a lot of support studios, yes, they get Call of Duty, but what they were really looking for was King. They wanted Candy Crush. They wanted King in this specifically. That's why they spent, what was it, $69 billion on a company that had $8 billion worth of revenue in the previous year. Their market cap was about $71 billion. That's speculative, but they had about $8 billion in revenue from the previous year, and they bought that for 8 times the revenue on that one. So my thought process was support studios and a mobile foothold. So yeah, and this was big news. This sent shockwaves to the entire industry and the people covering it as well. And the criticisms were what, Zero?
On the sort of enthusiast side, everyone was kind of decrying this as oh my god, this is just yet another attempt by Microsoft to have a monopoly on gaming. The sky is falling, and I mean that was kind of the general sentiment that a lot of the Sony fans had, especially just with concerns of, oh my goodness, the next Elder Scrolls game might not be on PlayStation.
Yes.
Which that was another big concern. And then you had some people speculating, oh my goodness, there might not be a Fallout game on the next PlayStation console. And then I think one of the bigger ones was, as you had people being fairly concerned of the thought of, oh my god, Call of Duty could just plumb evaporate from PlayStation and just be strictly locked out to just being a PlayStation, or excuse me, strictly being a Xbox and PC thing only.
Right.
So a lot of concern on there. And to be fair to those people, I know that I made kind of the criticism that some people made it seem like the sky was falling, but a lot of people seem to also forget that there are contractual obligations that still have to be abided by, whether or not the deal has been completed or not.
Right, and that's absolutely true. But I will say this as well, as much as people were worried about that, the first thing I remember when this was announced was Phil Spencer on CNBC saying that A, he is going to still abide by all contracts that were in the buyout, and that B, he had no plans of taking Call of Duty away from anybody. Like, he said that from moment one. We're not here to do that. We are here to, PR speak, sure, but to further the brand and help Microsoft gain a foothold in the console business space, and as well as make Call of Duty a better product in the future. PR speak, whatever. But he did say he had no intentions of doing that, period. And then around April, the stockholders from Activision Blizzard approved the buyout, which is customary. It means really nothing in this circumstance, but whatever. But before that point, rumblings started going around that some people were not happy with the buyout. And that somebody was Jim Ryan of Sony. And he started talking to some journalists. It seemed like it was off the record in some aspects until he started making public statements. But rumblings started going around that Sony is not happy about the buyout, and that rumors are that they might do something to fight this buyout from happening, even though there were no plans to keep Call of Duty out of PlayStation. But they were using Call of Duty as a catalyst as to why it shouldn't happen. Yeah, like, what were your thoughts when Jim Ryan was starting to go out there criticizing the buyout.
First thought was, well, looks like he's doing defense for PlayStation, and that's kind of a normal sort of gut reaction, but kind of odd for him to sit on things and wait for a couple months instead of just jumping right at the forefront right when this deal was announced earlier in 2022, and instead to, kind of wait almost until the midpoint of the year to say, oh shit, this is bad. We gotta make sure that there's some scrutiny on this deal. It's just like, okay, well, why didn't you have a fire lit up your ass earlier in the year about this?
My guess is that they're trying to get some juicy concessions from Microsoft about Call of Duty, possibly to keep the exclusives that they were having. And then when they realized Microsoft was going to play that game, like that was going away, then I think is when they decided it was time to start fighting the deal. And what made it interesting is how public he started to become over it. Like most companies, when they do this, they also don't want to rock the boat for regulatory reasons, not only just for regulatory reasons, but for business reasons. Because usually what that means is that you are in a foot of weakness. And if you have a weak foot on you, that means that you can be attacked in some side while this is going on. Which is why I felt it really odd that he was being so public and forward-facing about this. And essentially announcing what he was doing step by step throughout the entire time. So let's get into, let's go into July, okay? July is when Sony and Jim Ryan basically spoke to Brazilian authorities and their regulation board. I think it's CADE is what their regulation board is, and citing their concerns about the buyout, stating that it is anti-competitive and it shouldn't go through. And this is basically the battle banner that basically states to everybody that, oh, they're going to be serious about this. They're fighting this tooth and nail now. So what were your thoughts when it was revealed that Sony was trying to officially block the deal?
It almost kind of screamed of desperation of, okay, well, we tried to hardball Microsoft into maybe trying to give us some concessions with the Call of Duty brand, and just shit. They're not bending a knee and offering us anything. So let's try to see if we can get some smaller countries' judgments that are in favor of our opinion that, just Microsoft could be trying to basically outmuscle us and basically shut us out of the Call of Duty brand and everything. And especially if they were trying to do some sort of hinky exclusivity deal, saying, hey, well, if you're going to buy Call of Duty, can you, make sure that PlayStation is the official tournament platform for all Call of Duty games going forward? Can you, give us some carve-outs that we get the DLC first for 6 months before any other platform does, and so on and so forth. And I imagine just Microsoft probably said something to the tune of, yeah, we'll sort this out once the deal's been finalized, but if we're taking control of it, we want all the money. We're not doing these exclusivity games anymore. We're going to open up Call of Duty so everyone gets a fair crack at it. Everyone on all platforms can get everything unlocked right at the same time, and that way, it looks better on our balance sheet. We're not gonna give you a carve out just because you've had the carve out for so long, especially after this particular IP becomes one of our official in-house brands. To Microsoft's credit, I mean, that's kind of a normal thing to do.
Yeah. And this continued throughout the past few months in the summer, where basically Sony was talking to and contacting a bunch of regulations boards. He specifically went to the EU to talk to the regulators as well at a certain point, but he talked to Brazil, he talked to Saudi Arabia, UK, EU, to officially block this purchase. And Yeah, essentially, this is what, and that was going on throughout the summers and throughout September. Brazil and Saudi Arabia both approved of the purchase, with Brazil really sending out a scathing note to Sony to basically say, hey, if you don't like it, compete. So there was a couple that were not really buying what Sony was handing out. But two places did, and that is the UK and the US. And the UK decided that they wanted to have a more in-depth inquiry in regards to the buyout. I think the EU also wanted an inquiry, but haven't said anything as official about the buyout just now. UK specifically wanted to get the public involved and their thoughts on the buyout as well, and how they felt that it was going on. So the regulators are starting to get involved. This usually, when a buyout happens and it's going to go through, it goes through pretty smoothly. This doesn't usually happen. What were your thoughts when the regulators were starting to ask more questions about the potential of Microsoft buying out this company?
It was kind of interesting, especially since some of the other countries who decided to take more scrutiny into things, they really didn't take sort of the same stance that Brazil did, with saying something to the tune of, okay, well, if you don't like the fact that that Microsoft may own the Call of Duty brand, why not look inwards to all the brands that you have and maybe try to do something to bolster your brands to make sure that you've got something that indeed provide some sort of competition against Call of Duty, especially with the fact that Sony had recently purchased Bungie last year in 2022. So, I mean, Bungie being one of the best shooting game developers out there, you've got a great company who can probably make a really, really damn good FPS game that is competitive. And then, of course, in the Sony house, you've also got brands like Resistance, Killzone. I'm probably missing a couple others that are within the Sony house, but I mean, you've got those brands that you could potentially leverage, and then you've got Bungie, who's now officially a Sony studio, that, they could probably leverage Bungie to help build the mechanical side of it, of, make sure the gunplay feels like this, make sure, the movement feels like this, and so on and so forth.
Right.
So it was a bit interesting for some of the other the other countries who said, hey, yeah, let's go ahead and, take a bit more scrutiny into this deal, to not sort of push back on Sony to say, hey, maybe you should consider looking at your own brands, because you seem to have a grand tapestry of brands, but it doesn't really seem like you're leveraging much of them.
And what's been going on now is, I think we haven't heard anything from the EU yet. The UK announced that a lot of the public inquiries were positive for the buyout. That is essentially it on that side. But what happened in December is that the FTC announced that they are going to seek an injunction to block the buyout of Activision Blizzard from Microsoft. And they officially put that in on Christmas Eve at the end of the year. Now, there was a lot of criticism when it came to the lawsuit when it was finally filed, where a lot of experts, including one Michael Pachter from Wedbush Morgan, who essentially said that there was no teeth in the lawsuit, that this seemed more ideological than it really had, than anything else when it came to the buyout. But what he also stated is that the FTC really isn't the issue here. What he specifically said was that the CMA, which is the UK board, might be the issue, because the UK has a much, I guess, stranger way of doing their buyout regulations and how to appeal and everything. It's much more concrete than it is the FTC. What were your thoughts when the FTC finally filed their injunction?
I thought it was interesting seeing the injunction. My first thought that went was, anyone who's got any financial interest in Activision is probably freaking out now. What seemed like something that they would probably make a bit of a killing on once the deal would complete, now is starting to see hurdles. So I imagine any of those investors who are just ready to sell their stock right at the height of the deal completing were probably starting to panic, going, "Oh no, this is going all completely wrong."
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, if you bought stocks in Activision Blizzard and you still have them, you were kind of taking a bath this past few months, I believe. Their stocks went down pretty bad at a certain point. With experts saying and analysts saying basically that this lawsuit is probably not going to do anything, really. A judge might just throw this out entirely. It's looking like that the buyout, like, and my opinion has always been throughout this, and I think yours as well, is that this will eventually go through. The question is when at this point will it go through? And with Activision not releasing, I think they're releasing a new Crash game this coming year, but that's it. There's not going to be a new Call of Duty. They're going to, of course, update Warzone and Modern Warfare 2, but they don't have much of anything else that they're releasing. So I guess the question I have at the end of this is, do you think this will go through? And if it will, when do you think it is? Will it be this year? Will it delay itself till next year? What are your thoughts?
I still think I stand by my opinion that I had last year, which is I think the deal will still go through. There might be some hemming and hawing and on just arguments from Sony with them saying, well, look, just they could Microsoft could potentially suffocate the competitive esports landscape and everything. And then, of course, Microsoft can easily turn it around right now and argue that, hey, so I wouldn't take stock in what Sony's saying because they're arguing in bad faith. They could offer up the arguments that they put out towards, I want to say it was early to mid-December of 2022, where Phil Spencer publicly put out, hey, so we've offered Nintendo a 10-year deal to be able to get Call of Duty games on their platforms. And then the other big PR blast that he did was we also talked with Valve of the famed Steam store if they would like the exclusivity deal too. They said that, they were fine with the way things are, and we plan to still release the Call of Duty games on PC via the Steam store as well too. Basically, Microsoft can just point out to those and say, we've got the contractual receipts too, so if you think this is us just, floating some stuff on social media just to look good, we've got the receipts to say, not only do we have the receipts to show that we're serious about this, but also we're more than happy to work with other platform partners to ensure that they get the games as well too.
And it is really interesting that not only did they decide to do that for Nintendo and Valve, but Valve themselves decided to do a PR blast themselves and say, yeah, they offered it, but it wasn't necessary. It's like, we know they operate in good faith and that they know what's good for gamers. So yeah, we're not that worried about it. So, and it was a very interesting PR blast that I thought as well. I want to note one thing that was on the FTC filing and what the FTC is trying to do in order to block this. They did this recently. The main argument that a lot of people are saying is basically, well, wait a minute, Nintendo hasn't had Call of Duty in 10 years? No, they had the remaster of the original Modern Warfare, so yeah, but they haven't had a new Call of Duty in a long time, and they're doing just fine. They're actually thriving. They're doing really well. The FTC is saying, well, they don't count because they're not a high-end console. They're literally doing that on their filing right now. It is basically that we can't count Nintendo, even though they do the same exact thing that Microsoft and Sony is doing, because they're not high-end. That's it. That's all they have. Yeah, that's their argument, really. Which then gets its knees cut off from them because Valve who, I don't know about you, Zero, but I think the most high end of any kind of gaming console or system is a PC, and they're saying, nah, fam, we're good. It's like, we're good. Like, we don't see the problem here. So, really is weird that the FTC is taking so much time and taking so much energy to block this when it doesn't seem like they have a foothold on here. They don't have anything that they can go by. Now, I know that was kind of the point when I forgot the name of the person who's running the FTC now, but she really wanted to limit the power that the tech companies have, which I do understand. But she doesn't really have a firm grasp or anything on here that can help her cause in this, which is what shocked me in all of this as well. That she was trying to use the differentiation of Nintendo, Microsoft, and Sony, that it has been a battle on the front lines of the console wars, as her excuse to file an injunction on Microsoft? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it just seemed a bit of a roundabout way to sort of try to bring some scrutiny on the deal. And this is not me saying, oh yeah, just the FTC should just roll over on this. It's not a monopoly. Just get the fuck over it. No, it's definitely not that. But in my experience from kind of casually observing some of these sort of legal sort of proceedings, if you try to throw the book at a company for a very flimsy reason, it's going to damage the credibility of the case. Mm-hmm. And if the proceedings turn out that, they look at everything and go, well, Microsoft's doing everything above board, we don't see what the fuck the problem is, then, if it indeed does turn out legitimately that they're a monopoly, well, you blew your one chance to suss it out. And you'll have to wait your turn until you have a really goddamn bulletproof case to show, hey, we have evidence, we've got receipts, we've got testimony, we've got a metric shit ton of evidence to show that this is a monopoly. But problem is, the case is like 5, 10, 15 years too late. So right. That's really my thought on it, that, it's a bit presumptuous to sort of try to attack this right now when they don't really have much of a solid case for things, and they just would have been better off being a little bit more patient with just sort of kind of sitting on things and just making sure that they had a really, really solid case on this. But I guess the thought is, we can worry about it later, as long as we've got something that maybe could show people that there's a potential reason for concern. Then maybe we can just sort of get some eyes on this. And I think ultimately that might not be good in the long run.
I think you're right that it's probably going to damage the credibility of the case, but I think it also might damage the credibility of the FTC and its chairwoman, to the point where if this really goes belly up and they get humiliated by this, you may see her step down after this. I don't know if it will get that bad, but the fact that nearly any analyst that has looked at this and said, you have no case, what are you doing? It's gonna be really interesting to see what the fallout about this is gonna be. We both agree this is gonna go through. I think the only concession that will probably be made is that for a period of time, Call of Duty will be on PlayStation, and that is about it. Some people think that it's going to be, they would have to say for infinite time, Call of Duty will have to be on PlayStation, which I can also offer. Sure, you can do that, but then they can go ahead and say, we're not developing Call of Duty anymore. So, so, they could always do that as well. There's really not much more to add with this. This is still an ongoing story When more comes out that is interesting, we will continue to cover it. But this was the biggest story of the year. And amongst other amongst other big sales that happened with Embracer Group, with Tencent, and stuff like that. But this was the big one. This is the one that shook the industry to its core. And it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in the next 6 months, and specifically what happens with Microsoft, and to see if they have a good year this year with the games that are coming out, and if they don't, what things they'll have to do to make sure the sale goes through. So I think the concessions that they are going to have to make is going to be in correlation to how well this year is. Because if this year becomes another dud, I think they're going to give out more concessions to make sure this goes through as quickly as possible.
I think, much like you, I'll be waiting to see how this all sort of comes together, whether or not the deal goes through or not. I think it'll be really interesting to see how far this legal challenge from the FTC comes along, because if it does end up putting up a substantial challenge, then yeah, it'll be interesting to see if Microsoft and Activision have to throw down some major concessions to say, hey, look, we're totally legit. We can make sure that everyone's happy, and maybe we see more carve-outs and everything. But at the same time, just there's always the possibility of just things not going to plan, and we could see a situation where it could be that the courts end up looking at the deal and basically tell the FTC, yeah, we don't know why you wasted our time. Just back the fuck off this deal and let it go through anyways. Mm-hmm. And if that happens, then just who knows? We could see things get real interesting. Who knows? The Call of Duty brand may abide by its contractual obligations to Sony, but after that contractual obligation's done, we could completely see just a total 180 flip where they go, okay, well, we're going to have the Call of Duty esports scene be officially played on Xbox Series X. That's the only way to play, and if you want to participate in the esports scene, then you're going to have to get the right console to do it. If that happens, we might see a shift on things where just everyone goes, okay, well, guess we got to get on board and get Xbox Series X consoles, and maybe they see a little bit of a shot in the arm with console sales to that end, and then maybe at that point just Sony then gets to pitch a fit about it. But at that point, just the FTC squandering their chance to really put more actual scrutiny on the deal will have slipped through their fingers, and of course Sony may just bitch and groan and say, hey, you guys at the FTC fucked up, and just we had the golden opportunity, but you guys fucking pissed it away. How the hell did you screw this one up? So might have a situation like that in the next couple of years. There's just so many ways that this could go.
I think we're gonna call it there, right? You think we got everything?
Yeah, I think we pretty much covered it.
Great. Okay, so we're gonna call it here. That's the end of the year in review for 2022. Friday, me and Zero are going to record a video. We're going to play some games. We're going to go over the week in review for the news. There really hasn't been much, has there?
No, it's been a slow one.
It's been pretty slow. Okay. So we will probably go over the new releases for the month, which is also pretty light. And we're going to just shoot the shit and talk some games and play. What do you want to play? You want to play Senko no Ronde 2? Do you want to play, or do you want to figure it out off here and we'll figure it out from there?
Yeah, we'll probably figure it out off air.
Okay. So we're going to play something. We're going to shoot the shit. We're going to talk video games or talk new releases for this month. This will be exclusive to YouTube, so if you're listening to the podcast feed, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel so you can check out our weekend review and have us talk regular and talk about what's coming out this month. So on that note, that's the end of this topic. Zero, thank you for your time.
Yeah, it was great as always.
All right. I am The Wiz.
And I'm Zero.
And we'll talk to you next time. Bye now. Thank you for checking out Capital Games, where we cover the business side of the video game industry. Please like, subscribe, and comment if you enjoyed the video. You can also subscribe to the podcast if you prefer to have it on your podcast feed. And check us out on our socials and email us if you have a question, comment, or suggestion. Thank you for watching and listening. We'll hear from you next time.